Hello, my friends. I'm Dave, and this is my little podcast. It's a love letter to the horror genre that shaped and influenced me. And it's also a love letter dedicated to my beautiful wife, who, for some reason, wants to walk with me in this scary world of the horror genre and the even scarier world of reality. So, welcome to my bloody love letter. Hello. So, we are counting down 20 of some of the most influential horror films of the 80s for me. And today is the second episode. So, we got number 19. And this is a film that some people might not have heard of, but absolutely should have. So, picture this, it's 1981. And on that shelf is a VHS box featuring a skeletal hand bursting through dirt with the tagline, "It will take your breath away. All of it." So you flip it over and you see that it was written by the guys that had written Alien. And it also stars Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka. We're talking the OG Grandpa Joe. So, what the hell could that possibly be about? Well, today we're diving into a film that proves 1981 was an absolutely insane year for horror, and that some of the decade's most sophisticated scares came from the films you might not have seen. Today we are talking about Dead and Buried.
From the creators of Alien, terror brought down to Earth, dead and buried,
Is there any way whatsoever to reanimate people after they have died?
dead and buried. It will take your breath away.
Very peaky.
All of it. Dead and buried. Rated R.
So, why is Dead and Buried at number 19 on my list? Well, it represents something kind of crucial about the 80s horror that often gets overlooked. While everyone was rushing to copy Halloween and Friday the 13th, some filmmakers were creating genuinely intelligent, atmospheric horror that drew from older traditions. This isn't a slasher. This isn't even a monster movie. This is EC Comics brought to life with a Twilight Zone sensibility and a budget that allowed for some seriously nasty Stan Winston practical effects. So let's talk about the team behind this. So, like mentioned, the screenplay comes from Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett. And this is the same team that created Alien. Now, there's some controversy here that we'll get into, but the DNA is definitely there. That slow burn paranoia, that nobody can be trusted atmosphere, that sense of something fundamentally wrong is happening, but you can't quite put your finger on what. The director of this is Gary Sherman, who had made his mark in the genre with a film called Deathline. He was also known as Raw Meat. This was a brilliantly claustrophobic British horror film about cannibals in the London Underground. And Sherman had a gift for creating dread in confined spaces. And in the town in Dead and Buried, a town called Potter's Bluff, it might as well be underground for how trapped and isolated it feels. So this is a small town New England horror, and it's at its finest. Potter's Bluff is described as a town no bigger than a postage stamp. One of those coastal communities where everybody knows everybody. Tourists stick out like sore thumbs, and the locals have their own way of doing things. But here's what makes Potter's Bluff so effective as a horror setting. It's beautiful. Stephen Poster's cinematography makes this place look absolutely gorgeous during the day. Classic New England coastal beauty. White clapboard houses, fishing boats, that perfect Americana postcard look that makes you want to pull over and take pictures. And that's exactly what gets people in trouble. The film opens with a photographer doing exactly that. He's drawn to this picturesque location, starts taking some photos, meets a beautiful local woman on the beach. It's like something out of a tourism brochure, until very suddenly it isn't. At night, Potter's Bluff becomes something else entirely, perpetually foggy, perpetually unwelcoming, like the town itself is trying to hide something. The same streets that looked charming in daylight become these narrow, claustrophobic corridors where you can't see what's around the next corner. Sherman and Poster use this day-night contrast brilliantly. During the day, you understand why people would want to visit. At night, you understand why they might not want to leave, or might not be able to. So let's chat about the characters here. We have Sheriff Dan Gillis, played by James Ferrantino. He's a good cop, and he recently moved to Potter's Bluff. He's still learning the rhythms of small town life. Ferrantino plays him as genuinely decent, not the cynical big city cop stereotype, but someone who believes in law and order and doing right by people. What's interesting is that Gillis is kind of an outsider himself. He's not native to Potter's Bluff, which means he's approaching these crimes with fresh eyes, asking questions that maybe locals wouldn't ask. But it also means he doesn't understand the unspoken rules that govern this place. Now we have Janet Gillis, who's played by Melody Anderson, and you might remember her as Dale Arden in Flash Gordon. She plays his wife. She seems supportive, and she seems concerned about his work stress. But there's something a little off about some of her reactions. She asks questions that feel like she's fishing for information rather than just being a worried spouse. And then there's William Dobbs, the mortician. Jack Albertson, Grandpa Joe, plays him with this perfect mix of professional pride and genuine enthusiasm for his work. He's helpful, he's knowledgeable, and he's always available when Gillis needs consultation about the bodies. Almost too helpful, if you think about it. Dobbs has this great character detail where he's always listening to big band music. Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, that swing era stuff. And it gives him this old-fashioned, almost nostalgic quality that makes him seem harmless. Just this sweet old man who happens to work with dead bodies for a living. What I love about Dead and Buried is how it sets up like a classic murder mystery. We have a detective, we have victims, we have clues. But the clues don't add up the way they should. Witnesses give contradictory statements, and evidence doesn't point where it should. The murders themselves are brutal and public. These aren't hidden crimes. They happen in broad daylight with multiple witnesses, but nobody seems to know anything useful. Nobody saw the killer's faces clearly. Nobody can explain why a whole crowd of locals would suddenly turn violent. And here's the really unsettling part. After each murder, Gillis starts seeing people around town who look exactly like the victims. Not similar, exactly like them. Same faces, same clothes, but acting like they've lived in Potter's Bluff their whole lives. Is Gillis losing his mind? Are these lookalikes? Are the victims somehow not as dead as they appeared? Film keeps you guessing, but in a good way where you feel like you should be able to figure it out if you just pay attention to the right details. Let's talk a little bit more about Jack Albertson as the town mortician, William Dobbs. This is fascinating on a few levels. First, this was literally Albertson's final live-action film role. He died of cancer just 6 months after the film's release, and he was battling the disease while filming. Think about that for a second. The man who played the kindly Grandpa Joe who sang, "I've got a golden ticket," with such joy and wonder, spent his final months on Earth playing a mortician obsessed with death and resurrection. There's something almost poetic about that in a very dark way. Albertson completely transforms here. He brings that same warmth and familiarity that made him beloved as Grandpa Joe. But he twists it into something deeply unsettling. He's still grandfatherly, still charming, but there's something fundamentally wrong underneath. So, what kind of horror is this? Dead and Buried works in that gray area between psychological horror and supernatural horror. It's not jumping out at you with monsters or masked killers. Instead, it slowly builds the sense that reality itself might not be what it seems. The film starts with one of the most shocking openings of any 80s horror film. A photographer visits Potter's Bluff, gets lured into what seems like a romantic encounter, only to be ambushed by townspeople who beat him and burn him alive. And they film the whole thing, taking pictures like it's a tourist attraction. That opening sets the tone perfectly. This isn't random violence. This is organized, community-sanctioned murder. And the way they document it suggests this isn't their first time. Sheriff Dan Gillis, played by Ferrantino, starts investigating these murders. And this is where the film really gets interesting, because in most horror films, the protagonist is fighting against the evil. Here, Gillis is trying to understand it. He's not battling monsters, he's trying to solve a mystery that seems to implicate his entire community. Ferrantino gives this incredible performance where you can see his worldview slowly crumbling. He's a good cop, a decent man trying to do his job in a place where the rules don't seem to apply anymore. Now, I mentioned this has serious gore, and Stan Winston does not mess around. But it's not gore for gore's sake. Every effect serves the story. There's a sequence involving a hypodermic needle in an eyeball that still makes me wince. There's acid work. There's reconstruction surgery that's simultaneously fascinating and horrifying. Winston understood that the most effective gore is the stuff that makes you think about what it would actually feel like. This isn't cartoon violence. This feels real and medical and wrong. What makes Dead and Buried work is that sense of mounting paranoia. As Sheriff Gillis investigates, he realizes that everyone in town might be lying to him. His wife is acting strange. The mortician is too helpful. Even his friends seem to know more than they're saying. It's that classic nightmare logic where the place that should feel safest, your home community, becomes the most threatening. Alright, so if you haven't seen Dead and Buried, this is where you should pause and go watch it. I'm being serious. This film has one of the best twist endings in horror, and I'm about to ruin it for you. So, this is your last chance. Still here? Okay. Let's talk about what makes this film genuinely special. So here's the thing that makes Dead and Buried brilliant. Sheriff Dan Gillis has been dead the entire time. He's one of the reanimated victims, investigating his own murder without realizing it. Think about that for a second. The entire film is about a dead man slowly discovering that he's dead. Every clue he uncovers, every strange behavior he notices, every piece of evidence he finds, it's all pointing to a truth about himself that he can't accept. William Dobbs isn't just a mortician. He's an artist. He perfected this technique where he murders outsiders, then reconstructs them as perfect living replicas. They keep their memories, their personalities, but they're fundamentally changed, as death will do. They become loyal citizens of Potter's Bluff. Albertson has this incredible monologue where he describes his process.
No, officer, this is child's play. I've replaced missing eyeballs with sawdust and glued the lids together. I've used bent aluminum combs for dentures. I've used the back part of the scalp when there was no front part. And I folded one hand over wadded up newspapers when the other hand had no fingers. You find all this obscene, Sheriff? Do you know what is really obscene? Look at this. Look at the work I've done. This is an art. And I am the artist. What can you remember about a sealed box? A sealed casket? That is obscene. That is the death of memory. The cosmetologist gives birth. I make souvenirs.
He's not bringing people back from the dead. He's creating new people from dead bodies. It's body horror meets identity horror meets small town conspiracy. The entire town is in on it. They lure victims, participate in the murders, then welcome the reconstructed versions as new neighbors. It's this perfect closed loop system where Potter's Bluff maintains its population by literally consuming outsiders. And Gillis's wife? Well, she's been one of them all along. She's been watching her husband, this perfect replica of the man she might have loved, slowly piece together the truth about what happened to him. The film ends with Gillis finally understanding what he is. But by then it's too late. He's trapped in this existence as a perfect copy of a dead man. And the cycle continues. More tourists will come, more will be processed, and Potter's Bluff will endure. It's this incredibly bleak ending that suggests there's no escape from this system. Evil isn't defeated. It's revealed to be the natural order of this place. So why does all this matter? Well, Dead and Buried works because it treats its audience as intelligent. It doesn't explain everything. It doesn't hand you the answers. It makes you work for the revelation. And when it hits, it recontextualizes everything you've seen. This is sophisticated horror storytelling that respects both the genre's traditions and the audience's intelligence. It's EC Comics by the way of The Twilight Zone, like I mentioned before. It has enough gore to satisfy horror fans, but enough brains to transcend the genre. And another point, there's something deeply moving about Albertson's final performance. Here's a man who spent decades making people laugh and smile, who became beloved as this gentle grandfather figure. And his final gift to audiences was this chilling portrait of evil disguised as helpfulness. The fact that he was dying playing a character obsessed with defeating death adds this extra layer of poignancy. Albertson knew this was his goodbye, and he chose to go out playing against type in the most dramatic way possible. And it has been influential. You can see Dead and Buried's DNA in some later films. The perfect community with dark secrets became a staple, from Twin Peaks to Hot Fuzz to even Midsommar. The identity crisis horror shows up in everything from Jacob's Ladder to The Sixth Sense. But more importantly, it proved that 80s horror could be more than just franchises and special effects showcases. It could be genuinely literary, genuinely unsettling, genuinely smart. So why is it underrated? Dead and Buried failed at the box office in 1981, probably because audiences expecting a straightforward zombie movie or slasher got this weird atmospheric puzzle instead. It was too intelligent for the grindhouse crowd and too gory for the art house crowd. But that's why it belongs on this list. The most influential films aren't always the biggest hits. Sometimes they're the ones that burrow into filmmakers' minds and emerge decades later in other artists' work. For me, Dead and Buried represents everything I love about discovering 80s horror gems. It's this perfect example of how the decade's depth goes way beyond the obvious classics. Every time I think I've seen all the great 80s horror films, something like this comes along and reminds me how much incredible work was being done by filmmakers who just wanted to tell a good, scary story. It's also a reminder that sometimes the best horror comes from taking familiar elements, small towns, friendly neighbors, local businesses, and revealing the darkness underneath. Potter's Bluff could be any small town. William Dobbs could be any helpful local professional. And that's what makes it so effective. So that's a wrap. Dead and Buried comes in at number 19, and it represents the sophisticated, underrated side of 80s horror. It's proof that while franchises were dominating the box office, some filmmakers were creating genuinely original, intelligent horror that deserves to be remembered alongside the decade's classics. For the next time, we're moving up to number 18 with a film that captures the moral panic around heavy metal music. And it features some very familiar faces from the metal world. And as someone who was right in the thick of the metal culture during that era, it hits me right in the 80s. So, thank you. This has been my bloody love letter. Gratitude again to my amazing wife who inspires me every day, and to anyone listening. I appreciate you. Until next time, keep watching the shadows, and remember, love is eternal, but so is Potter's Bluff.